Social Development Minister Bathabile Dlamini takes responsibility for the SASSA crisis and apologizes. Parliament's Standing Committee on Public Accounts has now summoned Finance Minister Pravin Gordhan to explain Treasury's role.
Social Development Minister Bathabile Dlamini has taken responsibility and apologized for the SASSA social grant crisis.
I'm not blaming the officials. I've taken responsibility, and I did mention here that we had to change the submission to court because it was not realistic.
Dlamini explained that necessary steps had been taken to avert the looming crisis before it escalated to its current situation.
SASSA was asked to issue out a tender, and 5 companies tendered for the business of SASSA, and it took 2 years to finalize that process. And when we were just about to finalize our work, 2 bidders decided to withdraw.
But the Standing Committee on Public Accounts said some questions remain unanswered, especially about Treasury's role.
The contract negotiations with CPS are not yet done. And thirdly, we're not sure what National Treasury's role and attitude to the required deviations are going to be.
Meanwhile, opposition parties called for the department to be brought to book for allowing the crisis to escalate under its watch.
I don't think South Africans gain any confidence out of the responses given today. We are still without a contract with anybody, therefore there's uncertainty 24 days away from the fateful 1st of April, and the minister really needs to step up her game.
Dlamini has done the honourable thing by taking responsibility for the crisis, but questions remain about other authorities' culpability. Bureau Report, ANN7.
And joining us in studio is Fiso Mahlangu, ANN7 resident political analyst. Alison Tilly is from Right to Know, member of the National Working Group there. Tandiwe Zulu is with the Black Sash as the regional manager. We're also expecting Tim Sukazi, attorney representing SASSA. We'll start with you, Alison. Thanks again and good evening to you. I mean, the latest development, of course, the minister finally making the appearance in Parliament in front of Scopa, taking responsibility, onus on her department, saying that she will not blame her subordinates and that she apologizes to the Constitutional Court. Where does this bring us any closer in terms of having confidence that grants will indeed be paid out on the 1st of April?
Well, I think the difficulty is that there are still the 2 questions that we spoke about yesterday that remain unanswered. And the first question is who is going to pay the grants? And it seems as though CPS cash paymaster systems is the answer to that question. The question is how much are we going to pay? And that we just don't have an answer to. What we also know, I think, is that if it is correct that cash paymaster systems pay the grants, that will be in a situation where their services have not been procured properly. So it's going to be a situation where your lease has come to an end, you're living in a house, you don't know how much rent you're going to pay, you don't know who the landlord is, you're pretty sure the house will stand. That's not the question. But the question of who you're going to pay and how much, that question remains open.
Yeah, it's please stay on the line, Alison. We also have in studios Fiso Mahlangu. Just in terms of who should take responsibility, with the minister essentially, taking the rap, if you will, but Scopa also saying that National Treasury ought to answer. Whether they will be grilled in Parliament, as Minister has been, is another question.
And Treasury should be grilled. It's amazing to me that when a department is in trouble, and I don't want to say when a department collapses, because we have not gotten to the 1st of April yet. And so why do we preempt and say it is a national crisis? I heard someone this morning say this crisis is of magnanimous proportions. And we just should wait for people should be paid on the 1st of April. If they are not, then it's a crisis and an emergency. Of course, we should not wait until something drastic happens and then we take actions. But I also believe that the minister should be allowed the time she needs with her department to make the engagement she needs to make so that 17 million people who are deserving should be paid. But my question is also, where was Parliament? Where was the work of the various committees that sit in Parliament? I think maybe in Parliament people have an ideological reflection to say, well, I'm not the minister and so I'm not involved. I'll just sit here on the benches of Parliament and earn my salary. That's a very strange and dangerous notion. And so the Minister of Finance and Treasury should come in and also account. I attended the press briefing on Sunday. The minister, in 1.2 of her submission, said she had written to the minister twice, and the minister was less than assisting to her plight. And so Treasury needs to come to Parliament. They need to explain how they have intended to help the Department of Social Development. And also I think it's important that even as dealing, Cindy, with these political matters, that we take Mambatabile out of the picture and we deal with the Department of Social Development and we deal with Treasury and not necessarily deal with individuals. I felt that people were dealing with the minister they consider to be less than sober. They're dealing with the minister in terms of her not wearing makeup, and they have preset notions and ideas. And I think that's very, very dangerous. People should await the 1st of April, but the work of Parliament must do all that it can to support the department and make sure that the grants are paid on time.
And that's absolutely what everybody is hoping will transpire. But Alison, do you also feel that the other material stakeholders need to be apportioned blame equally, including the Portfolio Committee on Social Development and National Treasury?
No, I would completely disagree. In fact, I would say that it's not appropriate to involve Treasury at this point. The Treasury must come after the fact, after the contract is entered into, and be able to say whether or not it was entered into in terms of the rules. So to ask Treasury to get involved now is to ask the referee to come on the pitch and, try and kick the ball into the net. That's not how the game is played, not at all. Treasury must wait. The minister is the one who has responsibility, and I have to agree that Parliament has not exactly covered themselves in glory. They've waited until the last minute. But I think it's also to suggest that the minister is somehow, the word plight was used, as though she's been the victim of circumstances. She's the minister and she's in charge, and she just hasn't done what she needs to do. That's why we're in this situation. I think it's admirable that she's, come forward and talked about, the problems that she has as a person. So that's not the issue. But as a politician, it's difficult to say that because she's appeared in Parliament 3 weeks before the deadline, which is not even the court-imposed deadline, but is the actual point at which the contract runs out, that doesn't seem to me a good thing.
Okay, so please stay on the line, Alison. We have Thandiwe Zulu, Black Sash Gauteng Regional Manager. Thanks so much, Thandiwe, for your time. Just same question, really. Based on what the minister had said, that she had tried various interventions, reaching out to National Treasury, even to the extent of the Reserve Bank to inquire about the post office being granted a commercial banking license as an alternative to CPS. Not getting much joy there. Do you feel that the other material stakeholders also should be taking responsibility?
I would like to believe this is an area that we really need to be focusing in terms of who should and how should people have taken, or how should they take the responsibility. I think from my perspective would be that from the Minister of Finance, he stated very clearly and very early in terms of saying his objection to the continuation of either extension of the contract with CPS or the new contract being entered into, in terms of it being unlawful and uncompetitive. And then, which also he went on to saying that would be contrary to the requirement of Section 217 of the Constitution. So already that was already an indication that, to a certain degree, in terms of the process of procurement, there is a deviation which is actually deviating from the process, which takes us back to why did we have to wait this long up until now. However, in terms of stakeholders, maybe my point of view would be, I do believe that the finance minister needs to come in because he holds the purse strings, and he is objecting to this. However, at the end of the day, what we as Blackfish would like to see happening is that the beneficiaries do get their grants. We can't have 70 million people sitting in a state of anxiety and then downplaying the fact that this is a crisis. It is a crisis for the fact that 17 million people are unsure and nothing is coming forth except to say we will pay. How is it going to be paid? And who is it going to? How much is it going to cost in terms of the pay, that continuation or the extension thereof? Yeah. So we really need to have this information in terms of the info. We really have that right to know all of that information and to engage with it. At the end of the day, we can't have we can't have our citizens.
Yeah, please stay on the line, Tandiwe. Before I just want to ventilate this point again. As you mentioned, Scopa did say that Treasury, they're most likely to look into their role, but their Treasury's role is the disbursement and allocation of budgets. So if there is a contract with CPS, one supplier for the past 10 odd years, that in itself should raise questions because it then means that there is a monopoly in that particular department. And secondly, the fact that it was unlawfully appointed in the first place, and all of this only comes out now, Sfiso. So you think that clearly Treasury has a question, or rather a case to answer?
I believe Treasury has a definite case to answer. I think in response to one of our callers who says indeed, the lady from Black Sash, that indeed the minister is the one that should be tried and tested here, and our finance minister should not come and be perused. I think for me it's obscure why one would judge the minister to be in the wrong. Do we consider the DG who resigned to be wrong? Why? Because he got away. If the minister resigned tomorrow morning, would that make her innocent? I don't think that's true. So we shouldn't deem the one that got away to be innocent and the one that's sitting in to be amenable to trajectory or to judgment. What we must hope for is that she receives the support that she deserves to make sure that people are paid. But the issue here is not just that. It's that a monopoly is also at play here. But Mr. Gordon, I don't believe, would be very supportive of Minister Batabile and the potential crisis that there's in. Mr. Gordon wants to direct the SASSA payouts to the banks. And I think South Africa is in the loop on why Mr. Gordon would want the banks to make those transactions. He's well aware that the post office does not have the infrastructure to do it. So he's trying to lead it to the banks as a last option to say the banks will make the payout because of his relationship with the banks.
I was going to say, you say that with such certainty. I mean, there hasn't been an official statement.
As a finance minister, Cindy, in one cabinet, in one administration, in one deployee of one president, he should have been the first person to say, how can I negotiate or how can I help? But I think the minister's submission on Sunday was very clear to say the minister was not helpful. And I think that's why the committee wants him to appear so that they can question him on where he failed to assist and where the necessary measurements can be made for his assistance. But I also feel that the longer time the minister spends there being perused all day, I believe this morning she wanted to go, somewhere to another meeting, perhaps of great importance, and she was denied exit. I think the more time people spend on the semantics and the dialogue of what could have happened, what would potentially happen. She delays in administering that SASSA pays out. I think South Africans must just come back and say, Minister, how can we help that the 17 people who need this money don't need our political games, they don't need our semantics, they don't need our mudslinging, they need the money that they are dependent on. Cabinet, if it is united, must assist her in meeting those goals.
Alison, I hope you were privy to all the other responses, but just a quick question in terms of the Democratic Alliance wanting to be an applicant on this matter, essentially politicking as we find ourselves in this turbulent political landscape. Do you think this is aiding the 17 million that everybody decries, or is it also a case of opportunistic activity around the issue?
Well, I'm not sure if it's opportunistic because I haven't seen the DA's application. I'm aware of the application that's been brought by Freedom Under Law, which was brought today, which will also be heard next week, and that's going to be around the issue of how much we're going to pay. I think we exaggerate the risk to the beneficiaries if we say that they're not going to be paid. I don't think that's the problem. The question is, how much are we being charged? And of course, the concern is that we are going to be ripped off. And until we know how much we're going to pay, we don't know whether we're going to be ripped off or not. At this point, I'm afraid it's looking bad. It's looking as though we're going to be charged more, and we're going to be charged more by an American company listed on an American stock exchange, whose BE credentials have shown up as being, really questionable. So I think there's a number of questions about that which are for another day. But in the meantime, there's a contract that's being put in place now, which is not being done in terms of the PFMA, and which, frankly, we're just going to have to pay. We're just going to have to pay because we don't have any other option. I think one of the questions that we have to ask is, how did we end up in this situation with CPS holding a gun to our head and saying, pay up, or you risk the grants not being paid?
And listen, and I echo your sentiments. From Black Sash's part, we go back to the portfolio committees. That's why we have oversight committees as such, to ensure that, at any given point, there are interventions and to avoid unnecessary crises, as we see in this case with CPS being the only alternative provider. In your view, what else could have been done to avoid the situation we find ourselves in today?
Well, I think there certainly could have been harder questions asked in Parliament. The parliamentary committee and the majority party appear to have accepted the minister's explanations. And of course, now we see that those explanations are just not holding up. There is a situation where, scopa is now trying to come in and look at the question of whether the contract has been entered into properly, but also very, very late in the day. I can't say that anybody is coming out of this looking particularly good, whether it's the minister, CPS, or Parliament. What we do know is that we are going to pay and pay more for the services we're getting. And as to whether we're getting value for money, that's anybody's question.
All right, so the deadline, of course, of the 15th of March having to be signed off by Finance Minister, and also Constitutional Court having to give this the nod. And, nobody's really coming out here unscathed. Are you confident, based on what President Jacob Zuma said, it's not the first yet, let's keep calm, payments will be made?
I believe if they said payments must be made, if only one can be a fly on the wall and listen to the conversation between the President and the Finance Minister and the Minister of Social Development. It's also very interesting that there are many cases one wishes to be a fly on the wall and overhear. But I would like to allow them to declare what they need to declare, allow them the peace to secure us. We're not holding them at ransom to say, but you're not going to pay. We just believe and hope and pray for the South Africans who deserve it, that payments will be made. However, there was a constitutional finding that this organization had not been found properly. Their entrepreneurship was not occupied in the right space. And so that opens another debate altogether. And so it says which company to use. I don't know if South Africans are particularly concerned in tenderpreneurship and how the process is run. I think then the president will have to act very speedily If another company cannot be found, the minister has declared that 2 companies pulled out and the other 3 did not have the capacity to do so. I believe it would have to be the old organization just to push the work forward. The minister would have to then appeal back to the Constitutional Court and say, hey, people, I've tried. For now, in the interim, we are just paying people whilst we find another company to work with. I think that is the most amenable action that one can make to appease both the Constitution and to appease the indigent as well.
Yeah, from Black Sash, Thandiwe, just your view in terms of CPS stronghold on the grant system, and as it stands now, you know, they're fully confident that they're going to proceed for another 2 years, this pending the sign-off on the 15th of March. Shouldn't that be more the outcry as opposed to the procurement processes, or rather the minister being the target? Maybe what we need to look at is the loopholes of how money has been looted and how we've been fleeced, all in the name of having international or imported technology, biometrics, etc., that more money could have been afforded to the most vulnerable in society, but it's not done so because we're now so solely reliant on this multinational.
For us, it's not even about the multinational. It's who provides the service and how is that service provided. Is it provided in a lawful manner, and the business practice is one that is on point. What we are looking for and what we've actually submitted to the Concord is that they reinstate their oversight role in terms of SASSA, and also to the fact that in any engagement between SASSA and whoever is coming into the space to pay the grant, whoever is coming into that space, we need to be assured of the fact that the beneficiaries are going to be protected. Their private information is not going to be utilized outside of the relationship that they have with the state organ, as in terms of their ID numbers being sold and other products being sold to them. And also the fact that in terms of the system itself is going to be protected in terms of the grant system, because its integrity to be protected. And over and above everything is the fact that the beneficiaries need to be protected from any harmful practice which we've observed in the past 5 years, where CPS has been selling products, CPS has been selling your airtime, your loans, some which were unauthorized. And in terms of the recourse system, there is no recourse system for the very same beneficiary in terms of recouping what has been taken away from them, unlawfully so. And so we need to have whoever they engage with, as long as the beneficiary gets their grant, it's full.
All right, and also sorry, Thandiwe, I hate to break your word there. We're joined by Tim Sukazi. He is the head of the SASSA Transition Program Legal and Legislative Framework. Thanks so much for joining us, Mr. Sukazi. Just, the concern, of course, is the fact that there's over-reliance on the CPS and the question around the procurement process in itself. It seems that SASSA is, you have no choice in this matter. But what is the plan going forward to wean the department of CPS?
Look, the so-called SASSA fiasco really depends as to where one is looking at it from. It depends on which side of the fence are you, be it politically or otherwise, really. So I think what has been ventilated out there is more on a political basis, than the law. Because on the legal front, it's very simple. The Constitutional Court made its judgment and it ordered SASSA to do certain things, and which were done, according to the letter of those judgments. One, I would say, the contract between CPS and SASSA was declared invalid, and the court went on to say that because of that, SASSA needs to run a new tender process, and however, the declaration of invalidity was suspended pending the decision by SASSA on whether or not to award that new tender. So that happened. How so? So SASSA was ordered to run a new tender within 30 days of the judgment. They did.
And the issue, though, is what is the plan going forward? Again, there's various other methods that have been explored, whether the post office would be ready to take over this function. But I think we all agree that it needs to be insourced so that there isn't over-reliance on the international, or rather CPS in this case, or Net1.
Yeah, there's this whole myth that if SASSA enters into a new contract with CPS, it will be in contempt of court. You know, which contempt? Because there was a judgment on the 17th of April 2014. It said everything that needed to be done, which was done to the letter of the judgment. So which contempt are people talking about, you know? But look, one, you shouldn't necessarily blame the public. Sometimes, you know, our journalism, you know, is not up to the desired standard. In these instances, when I've heard on so many reports, you know, and I realize that actually people read a reporting by a particular journal, and then based on what they read, they start reporting themselves. You know, they escalate, and unfortunately, then it becomes an escalation of the wrong information, and in the end, it's misinformation to the public. You know, this whole contempt of court notion is non-existent. SASSA was ordered by the court to run a new tender process, which it did tick. Should it decide not to award the tender, it was required to come back to court and explain itself as to when and how it will pay the grants itself. It did. So, now the question is, which contempt? Of course, people maybe are basing it on the fact that the contract between CPS and SASSA was declared to be invalid by the Constitutional Court. That's what it is. So, and the declaration of invalidity, like I explained, was further suspended, you know, up to the end of the contract after SASSA made a decision not to award. So this simply means that come the end of the contract, 31 March 2017, that contract dies its natural death. It is no more. There's no more talk of that contract. If there will be any engagement of CPS, as is likely to be, that engagement will be purely on a new contract basis, be it of an interim nature or otherwise, but it's going to be a new contract. Clean.
So we're gonna